Well, I don't know about you, but I cannot believe that January is over. And so here we are for another wrap up. This month I read a total of 4 books, which was about what I was planning. I was actually kind of hoping for 5 books because there were 5 weeks in January, but alas, 4 it was. And this month I read 2 5-star books, 1 4-star book, and 1 2-star book. The first book that I read in the month of January was The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. I picked this one up as part of the rereadathon that Alex Black is hosting over on her channel. So I will go ahead and link that down below. If you're not aware of it, you should definitely jump in. But this was a reread for me, and I hadn't read it in 10, 15 years, something like that. Since I was a kid is when I read this last, I'm pretty sure. And this just held all of the magic for me once again. It was just as wonderful as I have always remembered it to be. This book lays down the foundation for Narnia and talks about the founding of Narnia and how that all came to be. And so in this book we have Diggory and Polly as our main protagonists, and they are 2 young children. Diggory and Polly are 2 young friends, and Diggory has a crazy uncle. And this crazy uncle, Andrew, he accidentally, sort of on purpose, sends them to this other world by just touching this ring that he's made out of a certain type of wood. And what they learn is that the rings are from the trees in this different land, and so if you touch the wood of the tree, it's going to transport you into this other land. And so we meet Aslan, who is, the lion who starts Narnia and founds Narnia and sort of breathes life into Narnia. Obviously, this is all an allegory for the story of the creation of the world and Adam and Eve in the Bible, and this is very much an allegory for that. And so you have to know that going in there, that obviously it's going to sort of hit you over the head with that a little bit. If you are not going to enjoy that, then maybe don't pick this up. But I knew that already going in, and I just loved it. It's so magical. C.S. Lewis just creates such beautiful worlds, and he just writes so well, and he always gets me every time. He's absolutely one of my favorite authors of all time. So 5 stars, obviously. Something that surprised me on my reread of this is the humor in it, and I didn't remember this as a funny book, but C.S. Lewis is quite funny, and he is very good at contrasting the innocence and intelligence of a child versus the foolishness of an adult. And that's something that just really stood out to me in this book. The next book that I read in January is another one that I really loved, and that is Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This is probably my new favorite book in Victorian literature. I fell in love with the characters in this book. Thomas Hardy has a very Dickensian quality in his characters, and he's just really good at creating vivid, memorable characters with strengths and flaws. And Bathsheba is the main character, and as a man writing about a woman, I found that he did a remarkably good job, although I did feel like there were some things that made me believe that he'd maybe been burned by a woman like Bathsheba, and so I kind of felt like there's a little bias going on there against women. But Bathsheba is such a well-written character, and she's so complex, and you really love her despite her flaws, that I kind of ended up forgiving Thomas Hardy for maybe some sexist things. But it is Victorian literature, so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into if it's a man writing. And if you like love triangles, get ready for a love square. Love square? Yes. There's a love square. We have our main character, Bathsheba, and she is surrounded by these 3 men who all kind of vie for her attention in different ways and at different times. And she's pretty much an idiot when it comes to dealing with her love life, and you just want to smack her. But it's quite entertaining how it all unfolds, and also quite tragic. It's definitely a tragedy, so be prepared for that if you pick this up. Despite it being a love square, it was not confusing at all, and I always understood what was going on, and every character was very distinctive and different, and so it never felt like anyone was a carbon copy of another character. It was always a very original character from person to person. So that was just artfully done. The only thing that detracted from my enjoyment was the writing style in general. Thomas Hardy is very overly descriptive, I would say. And he goes on for a while sometimes, especially when we're talking about nature, because that's kind of his thing. And he likes writing about nature. And so we get a lot of that in this book. It's a pastoral novel, so you can kind of expect that. And it's set mainly on a farm with sheep, and there's just a lot of nature happening. And so he's very descriptive when it comes to all that. So sometimes I would find myself spacing out and getting a little lost in his descriptions. Overall, I think this is a really accessible classic to read. It was very easy to read, I think. Compared to some other Victorian literature that I've picked up, I would definitely recommend this to people. The third book that I read in January was An Anonymous Girl by two authors, Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. Pekkanen? I cannot say her name. I actually have a full review video on this book, and I will go ahead and link it down below. So I'm not going to go into this too much, but this was in fact my 2-star book of the month. I was extremely disappointed in this. I really wanted to like it. It just had some problematic elements that I couldn't really look past because they annoyed me so much, and particularly the way that it's written. We go between two characters. Every other chapter we alternate. So we go between Jessica Ferris, who is our main protagonist, and she's a young girl in her 20s. She's a makeup artist, and she's kind of struggling to make ends meet. And then we also have the perspective of Dr. Shields, who is a very well-known and successful psychiatrist, and she is conducting a morality study, and Jessica finds herself in this study, and their story unfolds from there. We eventually learn that Dr. Shields is not who she says she is, and she's kind of using Jessica as a pawn to get her own things done and fulfill her own agenda. Again, I do have a whole review video of this, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but my bottom line of this book was that it was too long. It sits almost at 400 pages and shouldn't have been that long, I think. We could have done this much more concisely, and I didn't like going between the two perspectives. I didn't enjoy flip-flopping, especially because Dr. Shields' perspective was kind of annoying to read because she would always write in sentences like, you emptied the dishwasher, or you turned around and looked across the street both ways, or you did this, you did that. That was constant with reading Dr. Shields' perspective, and it was done on purpose, I can tell, because I think that the authors wanted to create like a coldness and a distance between Dr. Shields and her subjects, so that you kind of feel like she's just analyzing everyone and like writing notes down about them. But it just was annoying to read. It didn't come across as extra creepy to me. It just was annoying. And so I'm sorry, I did not love this book. It was a 2-star for me, maybe 2.5, because I did enjoy some elements of it. It was definitely readable. There were plot twists enough to keep me interested, and so it wasn't totally miserable of a read, but just there were some problematic writing problems. I realized, I think I forgot. Did I tell you that this was 4 stars? Well, it is. If I forgot to tell you, this one was 4 stars. Luckily, I ended the month strong, and I read one of my favorite books, which is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, and she is a master at writing children's fantasy, I think. This was actually also a read for me. That's very unusual that I would reread 2 books in the same month, but it happened, and I'm really glad I did. I needed to reread this before I continue with the series. This is actually a 6-book series, and so I'm really glad I have this one under my belt. I plan on reading book 2 next month and continuing on. This book is just a wonderful kind of coming of age mixed with fantasy. We follow our main character, Ged, and Ged is a bit cocky and proud of who he is and his magic abilities until something happens, and he accidentally unleashes a terrible power into the universe. He summons a spirit from the dead, and it is there to terrorize. And he is kind of shamed and goes into hiding, and then meets different people, has different adventures, and you see him grow and just become the powerful wizard that he's meant to be. It's interesting, from some of the reviews I've seen on Goodreads, a lot of people really don't like this book because it's a bit slow. I will admit, it's kind of hard to read sometimes. The language is just very like high fantasy, old fantasy, and you have to kind of push through it a little bit. This was written in, I think, the 60s or 70s, so it has a kind of old fantasy style, and so you have to kind of deal with that for a little bit. Sometimes it is a little slow and dry, but overall, I think this is just a classic story that I personally treasure and I highly recommend. Those are all the books that I read in January. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you have any thoughts on them, and I would love to know what you read in January as well. Be sure to subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I try to post at least once a week, sometimes twice a week on my channel. Happy reading, and I will see you next time. Bye!